So we will go to item 5, public hearings. Item 5.1 is a hearing to receive public comment on the notice of preparation for an environmental impact report for the East of Greenville Project. And the project is located east of the Livermore city limits in an unincorporated Alameda County. And we'll turn it over to Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Chairperson Larry. This evening, Senior Planner Ashley Verrill will provide the staff analysis with support from our consultant, Eileen Mahoney from Rincon Environmental Consulting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Verrill.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So as noted, tonight I will be presenting the East of Greenville project to receive public comments on the scope of the environmental impact report. As Mr. Stewart noted, we have Eileen Mahoney here with Rincon Consultants that is part of the environmental consultant team. In addition, we have Andy Ross, our economic development manager, providing support as he is the project manager for the general plan update.
Can you do the microphone a little closer? I'm hard of hearing, sorry.
All right. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide the public the opportunity to comment on the scope of the environmental impact report, or EIR. Comments should be limited to the scope of the EIR rather than the merits of the project itself. Tonight's meeting is not held to conduct a question and answer session. However, everything commented in tonight will be made part of the project record, and a formal response will be drafted as part of the draft environmental impact report process. Please note that staff will be returning to Planning Commission at a future meeting for the Commission's comments on the EIR as well as the project as a whole. This slide shows the general overview of the CEQA process as it relates to this particular project. A notice of preparation for an environmental impact report was released on November 21st, 2023 for a 30-day public review period. Tonight, we are requesting comments on the contents of the draft EIR. Following the close of the public review period, staff and the consultant team will prepare a draft EIR and ultimately a final EIR before returning to Planning Commission and ultimately City Council for a decision on the project. There will be additional opportunities for public comment during this process, including an opportunity to comment on the draft EIR once it is published. The project area is generally located east of Greenville Road in Alameda County, with the exception of parcels located west of Greenville Road between Marathon Drive and National Drive. The area includes approximately 1,140 acres of land and is located outside of the city's limits. The majority of the project area is also located out of the city's North Livermore urban growth boundary. The project area is currently primarily undeveloped, with land designated as agricultural and scattered with industrial, public utilities, and rural residential uses. During preparation of the land use alternatives analysis for the general plan update, the project area was selected for further exploration. The vision for this focus area is to provide a campus-like environment that supports innovation and technology-based companies, including a mix of housing, jobs, services, a mix of jobs, no housing, services and amenities to help the community achieve long-term fiscal sustainability and also serve as a gateway to the South Livermore wine country. There are 3 potential land use alternatives for the East of Greenville project that were developed to consider a variety of these land uses to achieve this vision. All 3 alternatives consist of generally the same land use types, but in various proportions and locations, as shown on this slide here. The areas shown in red represent general commercial land uses. The areas shown in purple represent industrial uses. The areas shown in varying shades of green represent recreation and park uses, open space uses, as well as agricultural uses. The areas shown in blue represent public uses, and finally, the areas shown in the hatched pattern represent research and campus type of development. The project that will be analyzed in the environmental impact report is defined as alternative B because it is the most intense land use pattern of the 3 alternatives and therefore has the most potential for possible impact. Analyzing the most intense alternative is useful for evaluating and understanding the effects of development in the project area. The project also includes modifying the existing land use designations to allow for the land uses listed on this slide. In addition, the project includes a potential measure on a ballot to expand the North Livermore urban growth boundary to include the entirety or a portion of the project. It is important to note that expanding the North Livermore urban growth boundary requires voter approval. Although it is uncertain whether the City Council will ultimately decide to place the measure on the ballot, in order to have the option to do so, environmental review must be completed. The EIR analysis will provide an understanding of potential environmental impacts and help inform City Council deliberations and create a potential opportunity for Livermore voters to decide on the land use proposal. This slide shows the environmental topics anticipated to be analyzed in the environmental impact report. This list includes all topics included in the Appendix G of the CEQA guidelines. So there are a few ways to submit public comments on this project. The first option is to provide comments verbally tonight. Alternatively, comments may be provided in either writing and sent to the address shown here, or comments can also be sent in via email, shown to the email address on this slide. All comments must be submitted by Wednesday, December 20th at 5 o'clock, which is the close of the public comment period. Staff requests that the comments are limited to the scope of the EIR. In closing, staff recommends the Planning Commission receive public comments on the East of Greenville Project Notice of Preparation and the contents of the EIR. No additional action is required by the Planning Commission tonight. That concludes my presentation, and staff is available for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Farah, for the presentation. Before we open the public hearing, I just want to see if anybody on the Planning Commission has any clarifying questions to ask.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have two, if you don't mind. One was, just to be clear that when we're talking about this area east of Greenville, none of the new expanded area that we're talking about tonight overlaps with the South Livermore Special Planning District, does it? I think there was a little bit of like area where that might have been true or might have not have been true.
So there may be a little overlap with the county's South Livermore Valley area plan.
Okay.
And the southern end.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about.
Right, so there's probably a bit of a boundary overlap, if I'm understanding correctly from Mr. Ross. But the rest is, sort of stands on its own outside of the city's South Livermore Valley specific plan area or county's South Livermore area plan.
Great, thank you. And clarifying question number two is less, I think this is a technical thing that I think would be useful for the public in attendance, and that is when you say, limit comments to the scope of the EIR, could you just give an example for all of us just to know?
Sure. So when we say limit the comments to the scope of the EIR, that means we are looking for comments related to the technical nature of the EIR and the topics that are analyzed by and under CEQA. And rather than say a comment that maybe opines on the project and not a technical nature.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hare. Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Sure. Chair Larry, if I can just add on that, and Ashley, can you go back to this slide with the graphic on there, please? So these are all the topics and environmental aspects that would be included in the environmental impact report. If you think, or the public thinks there's an area that's not included on here that should be, that tonight's an appropriate time to bring that up. I think as Ms. Vera said, this is everything in the California Environmental Quality Act appendices. So it's a pretty exhaustive list. And, but if you think, or the public thinks there are things missing that should be also analyzed, now would be the appropriate time to request those be included in the scope of the environmental document.
I'm wondering if it would be possible, Mr. Stewart and Ms. Vera, to leave this graphic up for the discussion so we can just keep referencing it. visually. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a note for the record and for the public that there is audio-visual equipment here tonight that is not part of the city. So I just be aware that that is not the city's audio-visual equipment, and that is an outside group. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll now open the public hearing. And how many speaker cards do we have tonight, Ms. Donnelly?
I have 10.
Okay, so we'll have a 3 minutes for each speaker. I don't see your timekeeping device up there. Are you the official? Okay.
All right.
So
Jean
please
King.
proceed.
Followed by John Stein.
Whenever you have a CEQA or an EIR, there's usually one option. And one option, they give you different options and in evaluating different things. One option is no project. And so that's the part that I'm speaking here tonight, is because I believe there should be no project there. Okay, it is premature and would be a significant waste of taxpayers' money to commission an environmental impact report, EIR, for developing the land east of Greenville Road. The land is protected by an urban growth boundary, UGB, that the residents of Livermore strongly support. Besides, there is no current need to consider land outside the UGB for additional development. There is sufficient land within the UGB to accommodate residential, commercial, and industrial development for at least the next decade, and almost certainly for much longer than that. The population numbers that the city and its consultant Placeworks have used are significantly in error. In September, a city staff report claimed that Livermore's population is 91,000. In fact, the city's population has never been that high. According to official state and Census Bureau reports, Livermore's population peaked in 2019 at 87,899. In April of 2020, Livermore's official population was reduced by 136, and it has gone down every year since then. As of January 1st, 2023, our population was less than 85,000. That is more than 6,000 lower than the city staff's September estimates. Why develop precious open space land when there are alternative locations inside the UGB to accommodate any actual growth for the foreseeable future? Intensive development east of Greenville Road would be extremely costly. This rural area now has no public infrastructure and facilities for urban development. It would destroy or harm agriculture, wildlife, wetlands and watersheds, open space and scenic beauty. Air pollution and traffic congestion would be increased. It would degrade the character of Livermore. This proposal is a mistake. Please vote against commissioning an EIR at this time for development east of Greenville Road to break Livermore's UGB. No development here. Thank you.
John Stein, followed by Doug Mann.
John Stein, 1334 Cathy Court, City of Livermore. I would urge that when you do the notice of preparation, you involve not only the usual suspects, Alameda County, the Zone 7, the landowners, LARPD, Fish and Game, and the various transportation organizations, but also expand it to Friends of Livermore, Friends of the Vineyards, local vintners, grape growers, and other irrigated agriculture users, and a Tri-Valley Conservancy. I think unless there's a shared vision for this area, perhaps somewhat different than the city suggested 3 options, the probability of gaining voter approval is somewhat limited. Perhaps there can be a set of mitigations, a smaller area, more agriculture, that is acceptable to all of the various organizations, and would urge that the planning process look into that. As far as alternatives, the area along Jack London Boulevard, between Jack London Boulevard and the quarries, is substantial, and the city is currently looking at warehousing, and would urge the city look at more intensive uses, either offices or campuses, perhaps even more commercial. Also, in the mid-city part of the plan, perhaps placing a light industrial along the freeway to act as a buffer for the residential would be useful. That area is bounded on one side by railroad tracks and on the other by 580, and some buffering would be useful. But more important is a shared vision that stands a chance of being approved. There were 3 assumptions made by the General Plan Committee. One was that there would be voter approval. The second is that population would increase, and currently in California, population and the average age of that population is getting older, and the population is decreasing. Finally, at the workshop, there seemed to be the idea that the high-intensity residential could be concentrated in one area separate from the city. And I would urge that as you look at this, that area be integrated with the city as much as possible, with facilities that are used by the rest of the city. Finally, the assumption was made that capital improvement funding would be available, and I'm not sure that the EIR will discuss methods, either bonding, user fees, or Melrose. Thank you.
Doug Mann, followed by Jeremy Troop Massey.
Good evening, Commissioners. I've not spoken with the Planning Commission for several years, and let me just say once, I won't say this every time I come to speak with you because I try to preserve time. We only get 3 minutes, but thank you for serving on the commission. It's selfless work, no money, all of the above, but we all know you're doing an important job. So when we have an environmental consultant that comes and says, only talk about these things, that's just really hard to do. We come here outraged that we have not 1, not 2, but 3 alternatives to break our urban growth boundary, no alternative to preserve the urban growth boundary that we fought so hard to create and that we want to keep, and that is the environmentally superior alternative if it existed. They're not being given it, so they're not going to study it. This has PlaceWorks fingerprints all over it. I'm no fan of PlaceWorks. I don't think they ever should have been hired by the city. I really don't know any jurisdiction that would even benefit from hiring PlaceWorks. They have shown that whenever PlaceWorks come here, mostly what they do is they make this place worse. And I don't like it. I don't know how to talk to these topics as instructed by your $300,000 environmental consultant. It's premature. It's unwelcome to have this alternative. And I'm not sure that anything more needs to be said. We know that the City Council is going to break the urban growth boundary. We know that's coming. We're not stupid. And your PlaceWorks is going to recommend breaking the urban growth boundary. Obviously, that's all they're doing. And you will recommend an alternative of breaking the urban growth boundary move for the City Council. I would say send this back to staff with your strongest possible statement that you need an alternative that doesn't break the urban growth boundary. Thank you.
Jeremy Troop Massey, followed by Jeff Caskey.
Sheesh. How we doing tonight, guys? Thanks for being here. So I am Jeremy Troop-Mossy. I'm the vice chair on the General Planning Committee, one of those people who sits through those meetings and spends my time much like you. So I'm happy to be here, even with the torn Achilles. Just to put my my comments on record. So I'm a part of that committee that spends a lot of time with this document and these suggestions to you. And I'll just get to the point. I think it would be irresponsible of the city of Livermore, on the behalf of everyone who lives here, to not consider everything in the scope of our influence. And that includes what is east of Greenville. No decisions will be made tonight, and no decisions will be made for the foreseeable future. I am asking you to think broader than the comments that you're going to hear tonight. I'm trying not to get, it only took 3 comments to get me spicy, because you hear a lot of things in here. I've been in that meeting for the past nearly 2 years, every other Wednesday, whatever, it doesn't matter. And there is more work happening than what is being suggested this evening. Decisions haven't been made, and at the end of the day, it comes to a complete vote. That is the beauty of this democracy. So I understand we all can come up here and say whatever we'd like to, relative to what we're suggesting. We are simply suggesting that we are responsible in how we manage the city, its boundaries, and how we would like to grow within the next 20 to 30 years. And if we refuse as a city to go this way, it's such a contrast of opinion to suggest that we can't consider going this way when it comes to urban growth boundaries. So, man, when you start going off your notes here, I got a little time, so bear with me. I didn't crutch up all the way up here not to say a few more things. So, I mean, yeah, there's still a vote. The city should do their due diligence, and we should learn more about what is ahead of us before we are so certain as to what is next for us. And that's all I got, guys. Happy to be here, and I hope we can continue to educate ourselves on what's best for the future of Livermore as an entirety. We are not the cow town we used to be.
Jeff Caskey, followed by David Rounds.
All right, anyway. Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name is Jeff Caskey. I'm a resident of Livermore for some 40 years. A decision to break the urban growth boundary should be based on significant, compelling needs that can only be met by breaking the urban growth boundary, and nothing we've seen so far shows that need. Even with requests from both General Plan Advisory Committee members and members of the public, we have not seen the no-build plan for the East of Greenville focus area. This plan requires that the people of Livermore vote against protecting this agricultural and open space, as was just noted. We know that Livermore residents value their protected ag and open space land, so the no-build option should be included so that we can get a complete picture for residents to consider. There is a lot of underdeveloped and undeveloped land available for economic and for industrial and research uses within the city limits. Within the city already, we have 78% of the industrial square footage of the whole Tri-Valley, according to the city's own economic development strategic plan. It appears that the driving reason for this push is Topcon's ownership of the land in the focus area, which they want to use for industrial uses. It's not surprising. That's what you would expect them to push for. But they don't need to be bailed out by the city of Livermore to suddenly get their land revalued as industrial land. They can buy industrial property the same as everybody else. There's existing industrial land, and the GPAC focus areas suggest even more. So besides Topcon's windfall, there's really no reason for this change. Let's take a look at the areas suggested. The wine catalyst area can be done outside the UGB. That's one of the reasons we have a UGB. That's kind of strange to go and create an area and then pull it in. The research facility zone sounds interesting, but if it's important, why wasn't it suggested in any of the other industrial uses? The ones inside the UGB. None of them are more than 2 miles from the lab. 2 of them are right across the street. So if the research facility is important, and I think it would be cool, it can be easily done inside the UGB. At the same time, along with wildlife habitat, the land currently contains equestrian facilities, grazing land, and rural residences. This proposed change will push them off the land. When the property value rises, as it gets revalued as industrial land, so will their property tax. So the increased value will encourage them to sell as the increased cost pushes them to sell.
There was some belief that bringing this land into the city would protect it even better, but this group actually is probably one of the groups that knows best that that's really not true. It takes a vote of 3 of you folks and 3 from the city council to completely change the purpose of land once it's inside the city boundary. Breaking the Livermore's urban growth boundary is a far-reaching, precedent-setting proposal. It should be based on unique, compelling needs that can only be met by breaking the UGB, and none of that is here. Instead, this would set a precedent of breaking the UGB to benefit influential corporations. Thank you.
David Rounds, followed by Alan Burnham.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. So my comment on the scoping of this project is that there should not be an EIR at this time. And I'll tell you why. In the staff report to the City Council on September of 2022, regarding the comprehensive general plan update, Livermore's current population was pegged at 91,000, and jobs were at 53,000. This report went on to say that using ABAG and MTC methodology, the population could increase to 120,000 and 57,000 jobs by 2040. Fast forward 1 year to last month, Land Use Alternatives Report for the General Plan Update, where they presented these 3 alternatives. The growth projections in those plans were wildly optimistic compared to what was projected a year ago. Using the middle alternative, for example, the general plan document is saying that cities should plan for a population of 134,900, significantly higher than the 120,000 that was predicted last year, and for 81,000 jobs, which is significantly more jobs than were projected last year. The general plan document assumes that you can only get these numbers by breaking the urban growth boundary and expanding the city by over 1,100 acres. Today you are reviewing a notice of preparation for the EIR of the 1,100 acres of current open space that Livermore would need to bring into the city limits to achieve these overly optimistic projections. My question is, why spend today the several $100,000 it will cost for an EIR for land that the city does not need today and might not need in 2045? Planning is important, but it is a difficult process, made much more difficult because of the significant changes the Bay Area is seeing around home prices and employment. Many people work at home at least part of the time. Some people work at home all of the time. Will this trend continue? Sure, and it probably will, and it makes these overly optimistic projections for the general plan document that much more unrealistic. Once the 2024 general plan update is in effect, the city can review that plan every year. Why not produce a document that is more realistic for the next 10 years, and if circumstances change, and they will, revise the general plan when you have a better idea of what the real changing trends are. Today's general plan review and update has not offered compelling reasons for these overly optimistic projections. If there are compelling reasons, they should be clearly stated and clearly and succinctly stated to the public, particularly if the city expects citizens to vote to break the urban growth boundary in order to expand the city. Thank you.
Alan Burnham, followed by Michael Ferrucci.
Good evening, honorable commissioners. I support an EIR to explore environmental aspects of potential development east of Greenville, but I'm concerned that the EIR as proposed will be misconstrued by the public, and I think you probably heard some of that tonight. And it will not address all the important environmental issues needed to inform voters of any proposed modification of the urban growth boundary. I don't really have enough time to debate all the other content that has been said, but I will make the comment that alternative B makes the least sense of any of those 3 options, is the most intensive, and that's why it's being, but there's really no way in the world that that's ever going to be done. The commercial area there is bigger than all the commercial area in the west side of downtown. So the question is, do you actually get the information you need to make an assessment of an environmental impact? I suggest that perhaps maybe by changing, you can, if you do that, but then you say, okay, if we reduce the commercial down to 30% of that value, what difference does it make? In other words, it's always trade-offs that you have to be considering. I also recommend that the EIR address the issue of public benefits of this development. It really hasn't been discussed here tonight, but it really impacts all these things. As other speakers have said, one of the main justifications for this is the question of whether or not there's enough land inside the current city limits to provide all the housing that may be required by RENA. And if you don't analyze this in the context of the overall picture, you're not getting the right answer. You also need to look at the issue of maintaining good jobs, housing ratio, considering RENA pressures, and even more important, generate what's the potential of generating funds to permanently preserve agricultural lands and wineries in the east and south of Livermore. In other words, again, one of the reasons for doing this is to generate resources to do other things. And if you're not including those other things in the analysis, you're just really not going to get a good answer. So that's why I think you need to take a more holistic view of this EIR. Thank you.
Michael Ferrucci, followed by Richard Ryan.
Good evening. I brought a guitar with me because, what can I say? I've owned a music store in Livermore for over 30 years. I've lived in Livermore as a resident for over 40 years. And I can't remember the last time I brought a guitar to a city council meeting or a meeting like this, but I just wanted to say that I agree with several of the speakers that have spoken about breaking the EIR or breaking the urban growth boundary. So instead of preparing a speech tonight, I thought I'd just write a few words and sing a short song that might be helpful for the other voices out there that couldn't make the meeting tonight. So I'll do this, why not? Leave my boundary alone, in my place I call home. Let the deer and antelope play, where seldom is heard a developer's word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home on the range is the urban growth boundary we claim. It benefits us all. Let them all hear our call to maintain a strong boundary this way. Home on the range, with a boundary not subject to change. It's a right to protect and not to neglect the open space that still remains. That's all I got to say. All right, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Juan Pablo Galvez Martinez. Galvan, sorry. Followed by Paula Peterson.
I'm afraid I can't top what you just heard. I would just like to...
I think we're out of order. What was the speaker? Who was the next speaker?
Juan Pablo?
So, sorry, Mr. Ryan was next, I think, followed by...
Oh, okay, I just want to make sure we got the right order.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Richard Ryan. I'd like to just second the comments of previous speakers, particularly Gene King and the comments of other people. This whole thing seems to be premature. The general Plan Commission is still here holding public hearings on this topic. It hasn't been decided by the City Council. It hasn't been decided by anybody yet. It just seems to be incredibly premature to even be considering an EIR. So I would hope that you would just send it back to the staff and say, hold this for a while and see what comes out of the public hearings that are taking place. So thank you.
I thought the previous gentleman looked more like a Juan Pablo than I do, so. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Juan Pablo Gal Martinez, Senior Land Use Manager for Save Mount Diablo, and thank you for the opportunity to comment here tonight. Among the many projects we've been involved in this area with my tenure at SMD is the creation of a permanent east side urban limit line for the city of Dublin, the permanent west side urban limit line that used to be temporary on the west side of Dublin, and we've also weighed in on the Aramis Solar project proposed for county land in the North Livermore area, as well as a proposed cemetery more recently that we've had concerns with vis-a-vis changes in land use, biological impacts, things like that. With regard to this project tonight, glad to see basically throwing the kitchen sink of CEQA at this, and that's pretty good because this project would most likely require an examination of all those issues. What is usually missing from an examination of biological resources that in our experience is very cogent to this specific project is that this project is being proposed in the narrowest point in the 200-mile-long Diablo Range, which runs from basically the tip of Contra Costa County from the water down to the Kern County, the little tippy top right there. So it is the neck, I like to call it, of Mount Diablo, the thin connection that very popular mountain, very biologically rich area has to the rest of the Diablo Range. And based on all sorts of research that we've seen regarding climate change, the need for a north-south migration corridor for various plant and wildlife species, but even perhaps more importantly, the need to maintain it for populations that currently exist and require their genetic integrity to be maintained with populations south of the 580 to connect them with the north. A lot of times that examination of the importance of wildlife corridors is missing from CEQA documents that examine things like this. Also, we note that there are very, very few crossings, wildlife crossings along the 580 that connect the north and south side of the Diablo Range, and one of them would be directly impacted by this proposal. So definitely examination of that would be very important. Obviously, it's been noted a no project alternative would be well served being included in this CEQA document. And if another alternative besides a no project is to be considered, one thing we've noticed is that cities that like to expand their urban limit lines, we call them in Contra Costa County, or urban growth boundaries here, but for example, Pittsburgh, they will attempt to set aside small areas of open space or mitigation land in a sea of development. Maybe better served to have a wide swath along one side, one axis of this project that could ameliorate some of your mitigation concerns. That's it for me. Thank you.
Paula Peterson.
Hi there. My name is Paula Peterson, and I really wasn't sure what an EIR was. So I kind of now understand a little bit about it, but I've heard people here say I've been here 40 years. My family's been here since the 1800s. I heard somebody say that this is no longer a cow town. Well, I still run cattle today because my grandfather ran cattle today. The property that you are doing this EIR is where I live. I heard somebody say that if we expand the urban growth boundaries, that the population of the people that live there will probably have to pay higher property taxes or eventually have to move. That's me. I will be affected. We talk about this being 20 years from now, so I'm speaking for my grandsons. Because today they're learning how to run cattle. They're learning the responsibilities of being in a country world. You take that away, and which we're taking away today, where kids don't even have that capability of doing, the outdoor things that they should be doing. We're becoming a computer technology where kids are, on their phones or they're on their video games. I'm fortunate to have grandsons that will grow up to learn how to have the responsibilities of being able to have good ethics, good work ethics, learn the life of the circle of life kind of things. Kids today don't need to learn that. This environmental whatever, I'm not sure exactly what it all means and how it all handles, but I think it has already been said that we have a lot of places inside the city limits that we can look at growing. It's already been known that the population is, going down, not going up. I had heard also how we were going to make this whole growth thing was going to make it so that people could live in Livermore and work in Livermore. Today, if you don't make $100,000 each in a dual resident, you will not be able to buy a house in Livermore. Rent in Livermore is extremely high, so expanding the city of Livermore is not going to fix the problems that we have today, and I don't see that we're addressing the problems we have today. So I'm obviously a no growth. I think she said it the best, that how she had explained the whole thing. The gentleman that said that this is no longer a cowboy town, look at your emblem. There's a cowboy. So that's just my take, and thank you for listening.
Those are all the cards I have.
Okay, so we will, thank you very much for the comments. We will close the public comment period. And there's no action required tonight from the Planning Commission, but I want to give each commissioner a chance if they'd like to make a comment regarding, and these are comments regarding the scope of the contents of the EIR. And so we'll go to Commissioner Dunbar first.
Thanks. I'll keep this brief. Thank you for being here and expressing your concerns. I know that, as was expressed, it's a rather specific topic, and hopefully you saw that we accepted your comments as broad as they were, and they will all be taken back. There were some things I just wanted to quickly go through. A no project alternative is required for this analysis, correct? As with any EIR, so it will be analyzed, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And there were a lot of smaller things that I think will be, they're all getting written down and recorded, and they'll be addressed. The other one I heard was that I wanted to jump after. Let me see if I can find it. An EIR does address public benefit in a roundabout way, but it's primarily focused on environmentalism, the impact of a project, and the public benefits are not really necessarily required or are only required in certain cases. Is that generally correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so we should talk about it, and I think I heard the word clear and concise explanation of the trade-offs, and I'm looking for that as well, and I think we should all expect that. I think those were the ones that stuck out to me. My roommate in college is finishing up his PhD at Davis with a PhD in geography, and his specialty is in wildlife corridors, so I really appreciated that comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Pacheco.
Thank you, Chairperson Leary. I think most of my questions were covered by Commissioner Dunbar. There was one thing I did want to clarify, that it is the city staff, so the city of Livermore is initiating the EIR, is my understanding, and it's required by law in order for it to be considered by the city council. Am I wrong about that?
So earlier this year, the City Council did direct staff to initiate an environmental impact report for this project. The city is acting as what's called the lead agency under CEQA, meaning that they are the decision makers as it relates to the environmental document being certified. Ultimately, as we know, the final decision regarding the ballot does depend on voter approval. But you have that correct, that the city is drafting the EIR essentially.
Thank you.
Mr. Kronzak.
Thank you, Chairperson. Several of the other commissioners have asked questions, and I was rapidly typing a bullet point list note up here to cover, so thank you, other commissioners. There are two areas in specific that I would just want to offer comment on. The EIR itself, please correct me if I'm wrong, is by necessity site-specific because it can only consider the boundaries of the area that whatever land use change is being proposed in, correct?
That's correct. It's putting together a baseline area to evaluate those impacts.
The follow-up question I have is with regard to the topics that are here, and this is mostly because we get a boot camp in this sort of information, but with regard to the topics here, these are the ones that the state of California requires in a CEQA sort of environmental review, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Looking at sort of the California required topics on this list, there are a couple that I would like to request special emphasis on as part of this environmental impact report. One is transit and transit accessibility. I do have some concerns regarding transit integration with the rest of the city of this area. And then the second area would be related to the, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the exact technical term here, public services and public servicing utilities to this area as part of that, as areas of specific study. That said, one of the questions that remained in my mind that I think has been also articulated by a number of folks here tonight is, while not in the direct scope of what is considered a technical EIR, there is a bigger why, I think, in my mind and in some of the minds of the commenters here tonight. And I do want to ask that as part of this process, can we focus on elements of that bigger why? I believe one commenter spoke about it as, can we make this EIR a little bit more holistic in its approach, even if that is not necessarily what is ordinarily done for the case of an EIR. In that regard, the areas that were kind of on my mind as well were impact on agribusiness and small business in that area, impact on wildlife and wildlife resources, specifically biological resources, and also impact on plantable acreage for our vineyards, which was why I was asking which sort of specific plans this area might overlap with earlier. And lastly, one of the other things, and I will say this having personally come from the General Plan Advisory Committee, is that this is about evaluating trade-offs. And I think there is, to a lot of the points that are being made tonight, there's this analysis of, do we have enough land in aggregate for specific commercial and industrial uses versus do we have enough of that land concentrated in the right areas for these uses? And it's sort of, the same argument that Xfinity or Comcast uses and says, oh, we're not a monopoly because we cover all of Northern California, but Verizon covers all of Nevada, right? Well, that's not very local. That's very sort of hyper regional. And I think in this case, educating our voters and educating our city with regard to why some of the sizing of the proposed land uses are being proposed this way would be a very edifying component to this as it moves forward. Because I have heard, that yes, in aggregate, if you were to take all the commercial and industrial space and pack it all together, we have plenty of it. But some of those sites are too small to be useful for the kinds of uses we want for our city moving forward. So I think digging into that a little bit would be something, that I believe would be edifying for both our voters and for folks moving forward. And again, none of these are things that are typically considered in an EIR, but due to the sensitivity of this area and due to the history, were just comments I wanted to add as areas. If you can include, please do.
Vice Chair Anderson.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for the comments. I know that they will all be deeply noted by staff. I just did want to do some clarification. We are not voting on anything tonight, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. The City Council has already commissioned the EIR to be done. That's correct?
That is correct. And if I may add, and Commissioner Vincenco's earlier question related to the state requirement, I wanted to reiterate, yes, it is a state requirement based on the actions that we do need to do in EIR in order to consider any movement forward at all, regardless of the outcome.
Thank you. And we have, as a planning commission, no authority to stop this EIR, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So especially since it's on the agenda as receiving public comment, there's nothing we could do in this agenda item to say no, even if we wanted to.
That's correct. And we would bring this item at a future public hearing for your recommendation at that time. But that would be appropriate.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I'll just add too, there'll be another public comment for the actual draft environmental impact report itself.
Awesome. Yeah, because tonight is about the scoping. What are we going to look at?
Right.
Moving on down the line. And Commissioner Dunbar brought this up about the no project option. That is not just something we will look at, that's legally required now, isn't it? Yeah, so, okay. Thank you. Next, taxes. Prop 13 still covers all properties in the state, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so property taxes would only rise at 2% for property owners until they sell that land.
That's right.
Okay, I just wanted to double check on that as well. So, and then, oh, that was, since the voters, okay, this question's gonna have a lot of ifs, so I apologize. First, if the council votes, if it moves forward, if it goes to the voters, and then if the voters approve. So after all those steps, if that's what ends up happening, then the land use designation would be decided at that point? Is that correct?
Yeah, so there would be additional steps that would occur after that, including things like annexation of the properties, future more detailed planning of the area as well. That would all be something developed in the future.
Okay, so we'll have even more, the public will have even more opportunity at that point for land use designation, correct?
That is correct. So this year is still a very high level picture of the land use pattern out here. And as Ms. Ferris said, there's a range of different land use types we're considering as part of this alternative, and that'll have to get further refined as we move through the process.
Thank you. It is good to see you here, Mr. Ross, because this question kind of pertains to the other EIR we have. Is there any overlap between the two EIRs? Or are they just completely separate?
They are separate but related, so they're working on parallel paths now, and the general plan update EIR is looking at the citywide scale at potentially east of Greenville, because the decisions on what the preferred land use scenario has not been decided yet, plus all the other focus areas. And this particular EIR is looking solely at the east of Greenville area. At some point in the future, they may merge, and we'll just have to keep coordinating these efforts as we move forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you, staff. I really appreciate all that. I think it was Jeremy Troop Mossy brought up the point that this is a very thoughtful process, that there's a lot behind the scenes that that staff is working on to make sure that we have every option available and understand everything about this. So I appreciate all your hard work. Jeremy Troop Mossy also said that we're no longer a cow town. We may not be the same type of cow town, but we're still a cow town at heart. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you to everybody who came tonight, provided their comments on this EIR scoping. Yes. Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Chairperson Leary. I had one more question regarding the scope, and it's just an understanding, because this is for a plan for 20 years from now, as one of the commenters pointed out. When the EIR is done, is only the impact looked at immediately when the land use designation could be changed, or are there projections for what could happen in the 20 years down the road?
Yeah, so the EIR will look at both, essentially, the present day, but also kind of fast forward into the future and look at other kind of changes in the environment, expected projects in the pipeline, and kind of what we call in the EIR, the cumulative conditions of the project and how that may impact the topics listed here.
I would just add really quickly to put another point on what Ms. Vera said, is we would look at a scenario whereby all these land uses on the map that are colors are built out, right? To see what would that impact look like, and we would project what time frame we think they would get built out at. And that's how we're similarly doing this with the EIR and some of the analysis we've done as part of the land use alternatives. Those evaluations look at what would the conditions look like at build out at year 2045. It doesn't tell us how fast or when, but if we fast forward into time and assumed everything got built out, this is what we would expect to happen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ross. So I'm assuming that would include the impacts in all these areas, including agriculture and agribusiness, assumptions based on population and housing, and a range of those assumptions.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I just had one question on the EIR process and then two comments on the scoping. Ms. Vera, the question is, could you describe to me the process? I heard some question from the public about how we're going to involve stakeholders and other agencies. That's not a chapter in the EIR, but that's a process that you go through. How are they involved?
Sure. So I believe the comment you're referencing to is talking about maybe distribution of
Alameda County,
the documents. Yeah.
Fish and Game.
Yeah. So the all these environmental documents, including the notice of preparation and eventually the draft EIR, those are sent to those agencies, consistent with state law and requirements, as well as kind of our neighboring agencies such as Alameda County. And so those will be sent. When it comes to groups that are not necessarily listed on, say, the state's list of kind of distribution, for example, like it's, Caltrans gets a copy, Fish and Game, as was noted, gets a copy. When there's other groups outside of that, the city does have a interest list that can be added to a listserv. That's kind of similar to like a public hearing notice list, where they are notified of document availability and provided, again, the opportunity to comment.
Okay. The comment I see in your list here, geology and soils. And when I'm looking at the alternative B and the land uses, you're going to have to make some assumptions for density, right? Because you're going to look at traffic. And I'm wondering about the contours at the north end of the area that we're talking about. And how is that part of the EIR process? You're going to be looking at how you would fit those industrial parcels in there and how the grading would look. That would affect density, that would affect geology, right?
Right, so the EIR will include a set of assumptions on kind of the maximum intensity of development based on each individual
see.
use that could go in and then analyze it, assuming that maximum intensity is
Were you going to
built.
ask that, Mr. Stewart?
No, I wasn't going to add anything to what Ms. Vera was
Okay.
saying.
So there wouldn't be a grading plan in the EIR. You would just assume that all the density that's shown in the, I'll call it the purple area, is possible, and analyze the site in that way?
That's right. The CIR is considered to be programmatic in nature, where it is kind of a higher level look at it. In the future, if detailed planning were to continue on this project and ultimately development were to occur, then that's when things like grading plans would be provided.
Okay. Last item for scoping, I believe it's Patterson Pass Road. There's the transmission lines that run parallel with the road just on the south side. And they're not your typical secondary or primary power lines. These are the, I don't think it's PG&E though. There's a substation too, right there at Patterson Pass Road. And I know that can sometimes impact what can happen underneath. So then there's a chapter on utilities, right? So that's a different group. That's not your typical PG&E coordination. It's a, go ahead.
I believe those are the power lines that substation feeds the labs, which is on a different network and a different grid. And so we would look at the impact of the project development to the existing conditions, and that would be part of the existing conditions. We'd also look at how would this development or area be served by utilities like PG&E, et cetera.
Okay. All right, we're no action from the commission, but yes.
I apologize, Chairperson Larry. I did have one more question and one more comment. Ms. Vera, in addition to the two areas of specific emphasis that I called out related to the environmental impact report, the public services and transportation areas, I actually had the word wildfires circled on my little notepad, which is, in my mind, it was a proxy for something that is actually not listed by the state, which is the impacts of climate change. And I know that's very, very hard to sort of assess, but at the same time, I think 20 years from now, if we continue on the trend of warming that we're on, we're going to be pushing about 2 degrees Celsius. And honestly, that may actually affect the kind of land uses we want to put out in that area should it move forward. So I had wildfire circled as a proxy for, can we also start thinking more about the impact of climate change here in our region and what that might mean for how we want to do with our land. So that was the other actual area I neglected to mention. And then I also just neglected to say thank you. There's a lot of folks here tonight, and I'm deeply appreciative of everyone in this town. And thank you for coming out tonight. And thank you to staff for this incredibly hard work putting this together. Thank you.
Just one more from me, and I'll reiterate, thank you for coming out, all of you. Those of you familiar with this process and those of you unfamiliar with this process, you're welcome here. And some of you unfamiliar might think this was all very dry. It's all just a part of the process. We're all eagerly awaiting that draft EIR. I'm sure I will see many of your faces again on that. I wanted to tee up a question to staff that I will probably ask when the draft comes back, which is to say, when the draft comes back, this commission, I want everyone to understand our role here. This commission is going to make a determination whether that EIR is adequate, correct? We are not necessarily going to make a determination that that is the option that we want the city council to take or the staff that's the one we like, but only to say that all the environmental impacts have been properly addressed. That's what we're being asked to do here. Whether they should do something is a council question. Is that correct?
That is correct, to ultimately make a recommendation on either certifying the EIR or not, and that recommendation will go to council. That will occur once the final EIR is drafted.
We are certainly open to our own personal opinions, but that's the thing that we're tasked to do with, and I'll probably ask it the same way when we come back. So, thanks.
Mr. Stewart, do you have what you need on this item?
We do. Thank you very much.
All right. We will
Can I ask one
conclude. So there's opportunity to, I'm sorry, public comment is closed, but you have an opportunity until December 20th to send in your comments. Yeah, appreciate that. So we'll move on to item 6.1.